Well, next on Weather Underground, a dangerous situation developing from Texas to Florida tonight. We're tracking potential Tropical Cyclone Two, very likely to become Tropical Storm Barry, perhaps even a hurricane. Louisiana and Texas coastlines squarely in the threat zone.
Hurricane expert Dr. Knapp is breaking down each and every threat, and he'll show you why you can expect significant impacts, including flooding, surge, rip currents, and wind, and all of this could be well away from the storm's center point.
New Orleans already feeling the brunt of this developing system with a flash flood emergency earlier today. We've got live coverage in the Crescent City.
We'll also discuss why today could be just the beginning. What could be a long duration, potentially destructive flood event for areas along the Gulf Coast and, well, inland. It's all coming up right now on Weather Underground.
And hurricane watches have been issued for parts of coastal Louisiana. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. I'm Alex Wilson.
And I'm Mark Elliott. A state of emergency in place for parts of Louisiana as well, as our potential tropical cyclone starting to get organized will eventually intensify over the warm Gulf waters.
Yeah, this system already creating problems across the New Orleans metro. The parts of the city saw over 9 inches of rain in just a matter of hours. At one point, a flash flood emergency was issued. And tonight, they're under a flash flood watch. That's in effect through tomorrow night. But as you pointed out, Mark, you may see this extended because the rain threat does not end tomorrow.
That would actually surprise me if we don't see those flood watches extended, right? I think you should count on them being extended through the weekend, maybe into early next week. So with this being just the beginning of the flood problems, we have our own Paul Goodlow in the Crescent City. He's going to give us a live update from there in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, but in the meantime, we got to talk about potential Tropical Cyclone Two, Mark.
Let's go through what we're looking at right now. We've got winds of 30 miles per hour. Eventually, wind may turn into a factor, certainly not the only factor. We've got this sprawling mass of tropical moisture. This will eventually all come together. A lot of rain energy is going to be coming in towards portions of the coast. Forecast to become a hurricane within about 72 hours. That's why the hurricane watch has been issued with that concern along the Texas and Louisiana coast. That's really for the wind and potentially some surge as well. But Alex, we know there is going to be a lot more than just that. We're talking about huge rainfall totals that could be measured in feet before all is said and done.
Yeah, and here's what we know at this hour. The governor of Louisiana has declared a state of emergency, and the mayor of New Orleans, LaToya Cantrell, has also issued a state of emergency for her city. Plaquemines Parish, they're now issuing mandatory evacuation orders for residents in that parish. Dr. Knapp, a lot to talk about, a lot to work with on this one. We've got a potential tropical cyclone still, but hurricane watches are posted. So I think a lot of people are going, what the heck does this mean for me? We don't even have a storm yet, but I'm under a hurricane watch.
Yeah, and it's all because this system is forming right on our doorstep. And we don't want to wait until it becomes a depression to issue tropical storm and hurricane and storm surge watches when it's closer. We want to give you the heads up when it's time to give you the heads up. And 48 hours in advance is when those watches need to be issued. That's when they were hoisted earlier today, before it became a tropical depression. That's the new procedures that the Hurricane Center has been able to use for the last couple of years. So it's a potential tropical cyclone, probably likely at this point, to become a depression or storm within the next day or two. They did send out hurricane hunters to give us an idea of what the winds are, about 30 miles an hour to the south and west of the center, pressure about 1,011, moving kind of slowly to the west-southwest at 8 miles an hour. So the aircraft data were important for give us a good head start to this forecast, because it's more challenging to issue a track and intensity forecast out to 5 days when it's not yet even a depression. You could see this is what it looks like when it's almost a depression. Doesn't quite have enough organization in the thunderstorm activity. There's a lot of little swirls around in here. It doesn't have a well-defined center yet, but it's on the way, and that will happen. And that's what the forecast is. Now, the forecast track has some uncertainty in it. If it stays on the right side of the cone and turns to the north sooner, it spends less time over water and hits folks farther to the east. If it stays over water longer and makes that turn to the right later, it has more time to intensify and comes ashore later and hits folks farther to the west. But because of that right-hand turn, a lot of people on the right-hand side of this event are going to get locally heavy rainfall and potentially life-threatening flooding no matter what happens here. So a lot of impacts could occur outside of that cone. Take a look at a couple of model depictions of how much rain could fall over the next several days into Monday. And like Mark said, this could be measured in feet in some places. This might not be exactly what happens because it is track dependent and structure dependent. The models might not have all that right, but the European model dumping a tremendous amount of rain over Louisiana up into Mississippi and Arkansas, the Mississippi River Valley. This is not what we want to see for flash flooding and river flooding, perhaps being life-threatening and damaging. GFS model has things a little bit farther to the east, but you get the overall flavor here that this slow-moving system and the curve that it's going to take put a lot of folks into perhaps days of heavy rainfall and flash flooding. What the models do with this system is, because of the warm water and the weak wind shear, you see upper level high pressure overhead, is gradually consolidate the circulation that you see in the colors. And the last day or two, probably in the Friday, Saturday timeframe, is when it has its greatest opportunity, if it's still offshore, to strengthen, perhaps rapidly, perhaps to a hurricane. That's what the Hurricane Center is forecasting. That's why the hurricane watch is up. The models generally agree on that overall scenario, but it's really hard, again, when it's not a depression yet, to be sure that it's going to become a hurricane. That's why it's a hurricane watch. And the Hurricane Center forecasters would tell you, we don't know exactly what the intensity is going to be, but the potential is there, Alex. Scary situation for both water and wind.
Yeah, and with the amount of rain expected out of this tropical system, flash flooding seems very likely. And reminiscent of what we've seen just hours ago this morning in New Orleans. Take a look at all this water. At one point, police were putting up barricades in areas that could easily flood, and public transportation was also halted across the area. Dr. Knapp, you just talk about those communities that are on the right-hand side of that turn as that storm makes it. New Orleans is one of those areas that could perhaps see worse when it comes to the rainfall. Not that anybody's going to make out. Yeah. But perhaps some of the elevated totals in places like Baton Rouge or New Orleans.
And no one wanted to see the heavy rainfall and flooding that we saw in New Orleans today, but the silver lining of that is how instructive it is that you can get very heavy rainfall and flooding very quickly for a system that's not all that strong wind-wise and far away from the center of circulation. Can you imagine what's going to happen when this consolidates and is closer and you get more frequent heavy rainfall, perhaps for hours on end? This is going to look a lot different on radar in a couple days, but look at that nasty band that went through this morning.
Yeah,
far
it was
away from the center.
A ton of rain, and I think perhaps almost serving as a reminder of folks what could be coming. You know, you hate to see the flooding, but showing them that even out well outside or away from this system. And now we know today into tomorrow, we've actually got these areas highlighted for that risk. Yeah,
and watch how this risk proceeds westward and northward and gets more alarming, okay? This is tomorrow and tomorrow night. And this could be ramped up depending on if the thunderstorm activity starts to increase on the northwest side of this. But look at this, likely flash flooding in deep South Louisiana on the doorstep of New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Lafayette. But this is only through Saturday morning, and that is nowhere near the end of the event of this slow-moving system because, you know, by Saturday morning, the center is probably still offshore. By Saturday night, it might or might not be onshore yet. And then even by Sunday night, you're still going to be on the onshore flow side of this in much of Louisiana. So that's why we got to look out many, many days. So through Monday, we're talking not just inches, but feet of rain. And I want to highlight, Alex, that this is not just going to be a southern and eastern Louisiana event and not just a coastal event. Heads up, Mississippi, northern Louisiana, Arkansas, up into the Mississippi River Valley. How bad of a year has it been there already? This is going to make it a lot worse.
Yeah, these areas are super saturated. Now we're going to throw more rain up into the mix. Even parts of like western Tennessee getting some significant rainfall. All right, Dr. Knapp, thank you. Mark, New Orleans, perhaps, you know, just a taste of what could be coming their way.
Just a wild morning there. But, I mean, if the grounds weren't saturated before, they certainly are now. Let's just talk about that for a sec, right? Because the threat there is not over. Meteorologist Paul Goodlow is live for us tonight in New Orleans. Paul, if there is a tourist city, New Orleans is it. Talk about a whole flock of people that have never experienced anything with regards to tropical activity. And then you had this morning with another system waiting in the wings.
And I think that scared a lot of people as well, because that happened without anything being named, without anything, really that close. It's just what can happen here in the city. Right now, I tell you what, it's actually quite comfortable. A strong breeze coming in from the northeast. And if you look off this way, we're seeing an outflow from a thunderstorm just off to our north and northwest, but to our north and northeast, just to the right of what you're looking at, that's a severe thunderstorm warning for some of the parishes kind of across Lake Pontchartrain here, close to the Slidell, Louisiana area. So that's the current situation. But we also have some video from earlier this morning of what Mark was alluding to, the heavy rain that came through just in time for rush hour. It closed down City Hall for the entire day. Imagine this. You're going through your morning routine, trying to get to work, and between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 a.m., you get between 6 and 9 inches of rain. Major problems across the city, major flooding, dozens of cars and people stranded in floodwaters. And even hours later, when the water did generally recede across many of the main roads, there were still stalled out cars out there. And because now the potential of something else happening in the Gulf giving us more rain, the city actually closed down City Hall for tomorrow as well. In fact, the mayor of New Orleans, Mayor Cantrell, talked about what people and residents need to be prepared for.
Now is absolutely the time to pay attention. Heed every single warning that comes from the city of New Orleans, and as you listen to media outlets, pay attention to all tornado as well as flash flood warnings. Be prepared for the impacts.
Impacts. In fact, the mayor talked about tornadoes. Another concern, anytime you have something tropical head this way, you have that risk of that added shear going on aloft, which could spin up tornadoes. Also another concern. And on the flight in this morning, there was about 100 Deltas on the plane. Delta Sigma Theta sorority holding a convention here. So if you're thinking about coming into town, the convention starts tomorrow, don't cancel your plans. If you want to, really concerned, try to. But I'm not saying cancel your plans. I'm saying be prepared for changing weather conditions. And ask locals, ask people at your hotel, what is the severe weather plan? What happens if we do have a risk? And hopefully you can stay safe as you enjoy this beautiful city. Mark?
Yeah, good advice there, Paul, to just rely on the people around you that have gone through stuff like this before. And you're going through some of it again right now. I want to show you a quick look, as Paul mentioned, across Lake Pontchartrain, across the river from New Orleans, some pretty big thunderstorms that are actually severe warned. So you're getting a view of those off in the distance. The left side of your screen, you've got a bit of that rain shaft, maybe some hail in there. There's a bit of a coloring to it on the left side of the screen. Then you got the thick gray dark clouds on the right side. That's not what happened that led to this. This was from this morning when you had 9 inches of rain overwhelming the infrastructure in the city. Remember, the pumps in the New Orleans area can take out 1 inch of rain for the first hour of rainfall and then a ½ inch every hour after that. This was roughly 9 inches of rain for some of you in about 3 hours. That would overwhelm anyone, especially areas that are, under sea level. It also was a problem in Baton Rouge. We had problems back in May in Baton Rouge with some very heavy rainfall. And so that's part of the story here. This soggy stretch that we've been on is leading to the woes here because the grounds are still saturated. The rivers are still high. The third wettest 12-month period in state history going back to last June for the Baton Rouge area. I want to go through a little bit more about the rivers. The rivers are such a big part of this story. You look at the Mississippi for New Orleans, it's been really high. Usually the baseline this time of year is somewhere around 3 to 6 feet. You're currently at 16, okay? So it's way up there already. Forecast of heavy rain and surge brings you to a quick 20 feet. 20 feet is an important number. Okay, the 20 feet is where the levee protects the city. Anything above that, you'd be overtopping the levee. But remember, New Orleans is below ground level, okay? So some of the lowest lying parts of the city are at 10 feet below sea level. That means there's 30 feet of water above your head, right? You have to get to the top of the water, there'd be 30 feet up. That means almost 100% of the people normally are underneath the river, but in this case, almost everyone would be underneath the water. So this is a huge, huge problem if those levees were to be overtopped. Alex, I think they would go through extraordinary measures of opening up all the spillways to get that river level down before the overtopping would occur.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big metro area. A lot of decision makers will be watching that very, very closely. Dr. Knapp, we also have to be aware of the storm surge, that push of water onto normally dry land.
Yeah, so that makes places like New Orleans having to make difficult decisions. Do you want to keep the storm surge water out by keeping gates closed? Or do you, at some point, if the pumps can't keep up, do you have to open up any gates to let fresh water that fell from rain go out the other direction? But right now, they're going to be mostly concerned about the freshwater flooding in New Orleans because the risk reduction system that's around it. But this flow around this developing depression is pushing water toward southeastern Louisiana already. And so we're already seeing some levels above normally dry ground come up. At the mouth of the Mississippi River, it's already up about a foot above normally dry ground. That's just the beginning of what could become a bigger storm surge problem as the system moves farther to the west and gets stronger, and you have a stronger onshore push into southeast Louisiana. And these are the areas that are under a storm surge watch. If it'll come up, well, we'll show the forecast numbers. 3 to 6 feet above normally dry ground does not include New Orleans, but it's the mouth of the Mississippi up to the Mississippi border and then around to Intercoastal City. These are the areas, Alex, where people could be told to evacuate.
All right, so these are the areas where you really want to be heeding the advice of your local emergency manager as well. Coming up, we continue to break down this developing threat, including live coverage from New Orleans, bracing for potentially more dangerous flooding.
And the mayor of New Orleans did issue a state of emergency for the city. What does it mean if you're living here or visiting here? More details coming up on Weather Underground.
Well, the city of New Orleans remains on alert for dangerous, life-threatening flooding. The potential for storm surge is there. Freshwater flooding is there. River flooding is there. And don't forget, the scenes on the right side of your screen are all from this morning's rain. The outskirts, the kind of broad circulation associated with our developing tropical cyclone brought 9 to 10 inches of rain to portions of the city, Alex.
It was a pretty wild morning for the city and almost a taste of what could be yet to come for a lot of these communities, because we think much more in the way of rainfall is on the way for a place like New Orleans. Paul Goodlow is there in the city. Paul, I understand you had some trouble getting into town. You guys had some delays because of the very, very heavy rain.
We did, and a little mechanical issue in the plane, but that was just cosmetic, not a big deal. But it was trying to get in because other flights couldn't get out. And then for a while, they were letting planes land in New Orleans. But even when we got on the ground, the gates weren't clear because planes were late getting in and refilling with passengers and pushing on out. And that's all because we saw this morning between 6 to 9 inches of rain, and some of that fell in just 3 hours' time. And right now, here on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain, you're seeing some dark clouds off to my north and northwest. But as we continue panning all the way over to the north and northeast, this is a severe thunderstorm warning you can see there on the radar for St. Tammany Parish, and that is coming this way. So it's just kind of east of the Slidell area, so heads up in New Orleans. This is headed your way as well. So the concern is we could see perhaps more flooding here across the city as we have more heavy rain coming this way. But this is, some would say a typical day, summertime day here in New Orleans. You could see a heavy thunderstorm, but remember, we are below sea level. The level of Lake Pontchartrain is sea level. The city is below that. Some areas 3, some areas 9 feet. So the city has pumps that pumps out the rainwater to keep the city dry. It can handle 1 inch of rain in the first hour, then a ½ inch of rain for every hour after that. And Mark, in 3 hours, when you get 6 to 9 inches of rain, you get flooding. And that happened this morning. It can happen again tonight. It can happen again through the weekend. And that's just with randomly placed and moving slow thunderstorms, let alone what can happen with a organized tropical storm or hurricane. So that's in the back of a lot of people's minds here of what can come from the sky here in terms of rain in just a matter of minutes. Mark?
Hey, Paul, what do you think is most concerning just for you thinking about the flooding? Is it the rainfall flooding, the river flooding, the storm surge flooding, some combination of the three? You don't often get all three at once in New Orleans.
I will take the choice D, all of the above.
Yeah.
Because you see the river flood forecast, which is right at the top of the levees there. That doesn't bring in the wave action even on rivers and the wind pushing the water above 20 feet and then over the levees as well. So there's always going to be some type of wave action on the lake and the river when you have persistent winds. You can get from some type of tropical entity. So, you got to be aware. Yeah, don't change plans, but be aware. Don't get caught off guard. For a lot of people, this has truly popped up out of nowhere. But as you know, we've been watching this for quite some time, and it was hard to believe that this is actually coming from something on land, not something from out in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, a very different formation kind of process that people may be used to or assume that's how it works. Paul, thanks so much. We'll talk more to Paul coming up as we continue on through the rest of Weather Underground. Quick look at what's going on with Potential Tropical Cyclone Two. A lot of the action, the big reds and oranges with thunderstorms, well away from the center of the circulation. These will eventually all kind of come together as this gets better organized. Winds of 30 miles per hour moving west-southwest at about 8. This is going to develop, right? The forecast brings this to tropical storm and eventually to hurricane strength. Maybe more important than the actual track of the center will be that New Orleans in particular is going to be on that right side, not only through the landfall time, but well after that with onshore flow. It's going to make it even harder for that Mississippi River water to then exit into the Gulf because there's going to be the wind and surge and water kind of pushing against that. So, Alex, I think that's going to be a story for the New Orleans area for days to about a week from now.
Prolonged issue, even outside of that cone, even outside of the bad weather. Other communities will be getting in on some possible real deadly threats, Dr. Nab. You know, so many times we talk about what you have to watch for with these tropical systems, and we talk about the water and we talk about the wind, but we also sometimes forget what's going on in the water, and that's the dangerous rip currents that can happen well away from where the actual storm is.
Yeah, and Alex, the reason we're focusing so heavily on this is that over and over and over again in past hurricanes, tropical storms, and tropical depressions, numerous lives have been lost in rip currents far away from the center of circulation where the weather's good, but the onshore flow around the circulation is creating a dangerous rip current problem. And when you've got a low pressure system, not even a depression yet, sitting over the Gulf of Mexico, look at all of this potent onshore flow coming into the Gulf Coast of Florida and up into the Big Bend and Panhandle. In fact, today, the weather is pretty good along the entire Gulf Coast of Florida, but the rip current risk is high from Clearwater Beach all the way down to Fort Myers and Sanibel, a moderate risk down in Naples, moderate risk Big Bend, Panama City Beach, getting over to Destin. And this is going to get worse, folks. This is not going to get much better because ironically, Alex, the farther away this goes, the more areas get in on onshore flow. And even after landfall, if this depiction is right, you're going to have onshore flow nearly the entire northern Gulf of Mexico long after it goes inland.
All right, so something to watch, monitor, and listen to the lifeguards. We got a lot more to come on Weather Underground, more on our developing threat in the Gulf next. The city of New Orleans slammed by extreme rainfall from the outer fringes of our potential tropical cyclone. We think soon enough this will be tropical storm, perhaps even Hurricane Barry, because the threats from the Big Easy, they're far from over. Thanks for staying with us on this Wednesday. I'm Alex Wilson.
I'm Mark Elliott. Reports of 9 to 10 inches of rainfall in portions of the city. Not everyone got that, but it was enough. And then, of course, all that water is flowing into the Mississippi, which is already at historic levels. The river forecast goes right up to the top of the levees for this one.
Yeah, so of course the residents there, they're watching this. The decision makers, the public officials, they're watching it even closely. Paul Goodlow, they're live now in New Orleans. Paul, I got to imagine that's beginning to become the talk of the town, knowing more rain's on the way.
Definitely more concerned, not just the rain, but whatever else could come from the Gulf of Mexico. Tropically speaking, a depression, a storm, or hurricane, what's going to happen? That's the million-dollar question. But right now, you saw that video what happened this morning between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m., some of the heaviest rain they've seen in quite some time. 6 to 9 inches of rain in 3 hours, causing some concern. But right now, I'm on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain, the city of, as you head towards the Mississippi River and some of the other areas of New Orleans is off to my south. To the north, we have Lake Pontchartrain. To the north and east, we have a severe thunderstorm warning that was on the Slidell area. See the dark clouds? That's headed my way, so we might have to duck inside some shelter over the next 45 minutes or so as that storm gets a little closer here. But we had a lot of rain causing big-time concerns. City Hall was shut down today. By the way, City Hall also shut down tomorrow. So if you have any business in City Hall, it's not going to happen tomorrow as well. And a lot of people were definitely caught off guard with how quickly this water not only rose in the streets, but also fell from the sky. It took a lot of people like this gentleman by surprise.
We're just completely stranded here. I mean, we came down and this happened all within a matter of hours, and now no one can get anywhere. They've shut down all public transportation. There's just disabled cars all over the road. It's like a hurricane. It's like actually like a hurricane.
And it wasn't a hurricane. It wasn't a tropical storm. It wasn't a tropical depression. It was a thunderstorm, a slow-moving thunderstorm, and that's why this city is so vulnerable, because it's below sea level, and a storm dumping rain like that can cause massive flooding in an instant. That's another reason why they call it flash flooding. A flash flood watch here in effect through tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Wouldn't be surprised to see that extended. Hurricane watches are to the south of us in the southern parishes, and the state of emergency for the city as well as the state of Louisiana to prepare us for whatever Mother Nature will bring from the Gulf of Mexico as we head from now through this weekend, Mark. So it's going to be a kind of a wait and see. But the bottom line is you got to prepare now. Prepare for the worst. And as we always do, hope and pray for the best. Mark?
Absolutely, Paul. Thank you so much. These things have so many different layers and impacts that we have to follow. Each one's just a little bit different.
Yeah, and of course, Dr. Nab, all depends on where you are in that cone. Even if you're not in that cone, that forecast right now, doesn't mean you get away scot-free.
No, and that forecast is still pretty challenging when it's not yet a depression to make a 5-day track and intensity forecast, put up hurricane watches. That's pretty progressive. You know, we couldn't do that 10, 15 years ago. But now that's what we're faced with, a system that's not quite yet a depression that is forecast to become a hurricane. We've got hurricane and tropical storm and storm surge watches up because this system is likely to tap into this exceptionally warm bathtub temperature of water in the Gulf of Mexico. This goes all the way back to Hurricane Michael last October when we had above average water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty much hasn't changed. Some of the Gulf of Mexico has surface temperatures above 90 degrees. This is fuel injection for hurricanes because it's some of it below the surface as well. So that's in combination with the weak wind shear, why the Hurricane Center is forecasting strengthening, especially after it gets internally organized. The latter part of this forecast, Friday, Saturday, if it stays offshore longer, the greater chance it has to take advantage of those conditions and become a hurricane. So rapid intensification down the road is a possibility. That's why there's a hurricane watch all the way from the mouth of Mississippi River out to nearly the Texas border. Not quite. It's over to Cameron, Louisiana. But look, at any one spot, though, your chances of getting hurricane force winds aren't any more than 10 to 20%. That's because it's so far out in the future. But the bottom line is all of these folks have about a similar chance of getting sustained winds of hurricane force. It's just time for hurricane watch a little bit farther east, Alex.
All right, Dr. Nab, thanks. Coming up on the show, much more on the dangerous flood threat this system is fueling and who could see significant rainfall over the next several days.
Welcome back to Weather Underground as we are looking live into Little Rock. We're in the section of the city here looking back towards the city where there is a flash flood warning, mostly for the north side of Little Rock. This is a camera that's on the south side looking back north towards the city. So we're looking at that, slate gray sky towards the left side of your screen. That is really heavy rain that is coming down through the Little Rock area, causing some flooding. So those cars that are headed in that direction are going to have a bit of a tough time. I think they're going right towards some very, very heavy rainfall and some much slower roads than the one you were just looking at. Here's the storm of concern, right? Here's Little Rock. Look at this slow-moving complex that's developed right over the north side of Little Rock, including North Little Rock, portions of Little Rock itself, and down through Sherwood also. Flash flood warning, just about all of Pulaski included on that flash flood warning. The bigger picture shows you how we've got these scattered storms throughout Arkansas, kind of arcing their way back towards Oklahoma. And then as we cross out of Oklahoma and down towards Texas, there's been several rounds of severe storms. This whole line is severe warned at this point. Very gusty winds there. And then got to watch out in Dallas. Dallas-Fort Worth, already a storm has just popped up west of Fort Worth. But the complex is still holding together, coming down I-35. It's just about in Denton. This is then going to come into the Dallas suburbs and then Dallas itself. Alex, this is going to be torrential rain, maybe some decent hail out of this also. So severe weather in Dallas tonight also.
Yeah, a lot of major metros that we have to watch even outside of our tropical issue. Yeah. A lot of storms out there. Let's get you back, though, to our potential tropical cyclone 2. Again, anticipation is that this will become at least tropical storm Barry, perhaps even a hurricane Barry in the coming days. That's where the National Hurricane Center forecast does take this, 85-mile-per-hour winds by late Saturday. You can see it's not just the Gulf Coast, though, that has to watch for the threats, but rather areas well inland as well. Big-time rainfall likely as we head into the upcoming weekend, even early next week. Forecast models. This is the European rainfall through Monday has over 2 feet of rain possible, say around a place like Baton Rouge, and then higher totals extending well up into portions of the western half of Mississippi, even up towards Memphis, Tennessee. Now the GFS, model rainfall keeps it a little closer to New Orleans, really between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. But again, heavy rainfall extending well inland. And Mark, we're getting more data as the evening goes on as the hurricane hunters are out again.
Yeah, those models are getting an injection of actual data, which is so helpful. The hurricane hunters, the NOAA aircraft getting in towards the area with potential tropical cyclone 2. And the planes they're on are highly specialized aircraft. And we got a close look inside.
Hi, I'm Devin Meister with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. Going to take you on a tour of our plane. This is a WC-130J, which means it's W is weather modified. This is where our weather officer sits, and he or she is talking with Karka. Karka is our liaison to the National Hurricane Center. And this is where our loadmaster sits. And our loadmaster works in coordination with our weather officer on where exactly we do our drops. And these are the drop sondes that are launched through our drop tube. And we're collecting wind speed, wind direction, temperature, and pressure. What's very challenging is that you're flying through essentially a band of thunderstorms, and you have to mitigate that while you're flying through it. Up here is our flight deck, and we have 2 pilots and a navigator that sits up here. And our navigator is in constant coordination with our weather officer about where the National Hurricane Center wants us to go within the storm. And the navigator has the job of keeping us safe and keeping us away from the most dangerous parts of the storm, which we try to avoid but can't always. We have a very different type of mission to protect the United States and the United States assets. It just so happens we fly into hurricanes instead of combat.
And they provide such crucial data, Dr. Nab, that goes directly into the models, that creates a better forecast when they start flying. It's just an absolutely necessary component of the weather enterprise.
Yeah, both the humans and the models benefit tremendously by the various types of hurricane hunter missions that are flown. And we had 2 different types of missions today that are very different from what will be flown after this system gets stronger. Today, during the day, we had an investigative mission from the Air Force C-130s. They took off from Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, and they were flying down at about 1,000 feet, zipping around trying to locate a well-defined center of circulation. And then we had the NOAA 42 plane, one of the P-3s named Kermit, that flew from Lakeland, took off about 4 p.m. Eastern time today, and they're flying today what's called a lawnmower pattern at higher altitude, and they are dropping some 20 dropsons into the atmosphere from that higher altitude. Those data are going to get into the Hurricane Weather Research Forecast model, a dedicated hurricane model, to try to improve the starting point that forecast model gets. Now, Mark, the interesting thing is that once this system gets stronger, they will start flying both Air Force and NOAA planes at a higher altitude at 5,000 feet when it's a tropical storm, maybe at about 10,000 feet when it's a well-developed hurricane. And then if the NOAA G4 jet flies around it, then we'll get dropsons in the environment. So they use a lot of different tools in a lot of different ways depending on the situation.
And I think because it's so close to land, we're going to get almost continuous data out of this one. There's no transit time to get into the storm. So that's one of the benefits of the homegrown system, I suppose.
Yeah, everything else, we don't like it.
Everything else is bad. All right, Dr. Knabb, still so much more to follow here, so we'll bring it to you as we break down each and every threat with this storm.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. You're looking live at the skyline of New Orleans. The Crescent City here dealt with major flooding this morning, a flash flood emergency. 6 to 9 inches of rain fell in about 3 hours this morning between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. Did a number on the rush hour. City Hall closed down today. It's also closed tomorrow, by the way. And that's even before whatever is trying to develop in the Gulf of Mexico. Could that be a tropical depression? Could that be a tropical storm Barry? Could it be a hurricane Barry? We don't know that yet. The forecast is for it to become a hurricane, but bottom line is, no matter what it's called, we're going to have a lot of impacts. And speaking of rain like we had this morning, there's also rain just off behind me. That's why we kind of moved our locations. As you look off to the north and east, there's a severe thunderstorm warning that moved off of land. It's now a special marine warning over Lake Pontchartrain, which is behind me. And that's basically a severe thunderstorm warning for marine interest, for people on boats out there, even personal watercraft. Big concerns. We've got winds gusting at 34 knots, so we're talking like 40 miles per hour across the area. And with rain and lightning, it's headed this way, heading back into New Orleans. Right now, it doesn't look like we'll see the type of rainfall rate that we saw this morning. Some areas of close to 3 inches in just 1 hour. But it is going to bring more rain in a city that's below sea level. And the pumps here are designed to handle 1 inch of rain in 1 hour, then every subsequent hour, a ½ inch of rain an hour. That's all it can pump out for every hour after that first hour. So it's not unusual to get a lot of heavy rain. But that's just with these thunderstorms here. Then we have organized thunderstorms, potentially a depression, potentially a storm, potentially a hurricane. I'm going to bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb. And Dr. Knabb, over the years, we have really kind of fine-tuned on where the track of these tropical entities are going, but the intensity forecast is kind of lagging behind. So the forecast right now is for this to be a hurricane, and I know we've had a lot of history of rapidly intensifying systems, so I think that's part of the ingredients in the sauce there. But there's also a chance that this thing could just be a disturbance or a tropical storm, too.
Yeah, Paul, this is a really tricky intensity forecast when you're starting from something that's not a depression yet, and that makes it harder because you can't really get a good handle on when it's going to consolidate an inner core. But the conditions are there for this to intensify and perhaps rapidly in the last day or two before landfall. But one of the critical questions is, when does it make the right-hand turn and how sharply? On the right side of the cone, Paul, this could come ashore a lot farther east and a lot sooner. If it stays offshore longer, it maybe spends another day or two over those warm waters, and then it could get stronger but come ashore farther west. Those are just a couple of the questions that need to yet be answered. But that's why a hurricane watch, the possibility of a hurricane coming ashore.
Right, and the big thing is impacts, and if it does linger longer over the Gulf, we can still kind of continue to churn that moisture, the rain, the thunderstorms right on land, including here in New Orleans. So definitely a big concern, even though we're not officially in the cone, and we are still not out of the woods by far in terms of impacts we'll see here across New Orleans. Mark?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. There's so many impacts that still have to get completely ironed out here. And so, you know, Dr. Knabb was talking about just where it turns, but so much else goes with that.
Yeah, and so many areas inland, too. You know, we talk about a flood threat along the coast. A lot of these communities that are already so soaked are gearing up for more heavy rainfall.
Yeah, and so regardless of exactly when and where that turn occurs, a lot of folks are going to be on the right-hand wet side of this
hours,
system.
maybe
For
days.
with a slow-moving system. That's one thing about this system. If you're asked what category is this going to become, say slow. That slow category kind of storm that can dump feet of rain.
And so many people are focusing on the category, which is just a function of wind. And I think in the scale of impacts from this, wind's probably at the bottom of your list.
Yeah, and it also historically is among the least life-threatening. It can be, but water is historically the deadliest part of tropical storms and hurricanes. Ironically, one of the greatest wind threats here is trees falling on moist soil over the Mississippi Valley. So keep that in mind after it goes closer to land and goes inland. Here's what something looks like when it's not yet a tropical depression, but it's already moisture laden, already had that flash flooding in New Orleans today. But look at what the models do with this. They start off with that low level spin that you see in the colors here, south of Pensacola and west of Tampa, generally speaking, okay, southeast of New Orleans. And because of the really warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, near 90 degrees in some spots, it ramps up tomorrow and into Friday. And again, depending on how long it stays offshore, it will have that much more time to tap into that moisture and have its inner core develop and strengthen. We just don't know how long it'll be offshore and when it will really start to crank up. But it's because of that possibility of moving slowly enough and staying offshore long enough that it could become a hurricane. And the European model, taking advantage of that upper level pattern that has weak wind shear, makes a pretty significant system. And then it moves slowly as it moves inland. So that's another part of this story. The landfall of a tropical system is often just the beginning of the event for a lot of folks inland. GFS model is kind of similar. We have the overall sense of things being very much the same, just a little bit different on the timing and location of landfall, but overall the sense is the same. It's a slow turn to the right and an opportunity to strengthen. And I want to highlight folks inland. This is not just going to be a coastal event. The heavy rainfall could extend way up into places like Arkansas and Oklahoma and Missouri. And then the turn here keeps places like New Orleans and Baton Rouge on the wet, rainy side of this for days and days to come. We've got wind to worry about. We've got water to worry about. We're going to go back to Paul Goodlow, and we're going to break down every hazard that this system brings when we come back.
Right now on Weather Underground, a dangerous situation developing from Texas to Florida tonight. We're tracking potential Tropical Cyclone 2, very likely to become Tropical Storm Barry, perhaps even Hurricane Barry. The Louisiana and Texas coasts are squarely in the bullseye.
Hurricane expert Dr. Nab is breaking down each and every threat. He'll show you why you can expect significant impacts, including, but maybe not limited to, flooding, storm surge, rip currents, wind. All of this could be well away from the center, too.
Yeah, in New Orleans, they've already felt the brunt of this developing system. Flash flood emergency earlier today in the city. We've got live coverage in town.
And could this just be the beginning of a long duration, potentially destructive event for flooding along the Gulf Coast and well inland? We show you coming up right now on Weather Underground.
Hurricane watches have been posted for parts of coastal Louisiana. Thanks for staying with us here on Weather Underground. I'm Alex Wilson.
I'm Mark Elliott. State of emergency in place for Louisiana. We're less than an hour away, I believe, now from the next advisory coming out. Maybe some new information from the National Hurricane Center, so stay tuned for that as our storm is getting better organized over the warm Gulf waters.
Yeah, but it's already created big problems today in New Orleans City. Downtown saw over 9 inches of rain in a matter of hours in parts of New Orleans. We had cars stranded, water swamping the streets, and at one point a flash flood emergency was issued. By the way, New Orleans remains under a flash flood watch through tomorrow night at least.
At least is the good way to put it. Of course, this is just the beginning of the flood problems for New Orleans. Paul Goodlow is in the Crescent City. We have a live update from him in about 5 minutes.
But in the meantime, I want to get you an update on the very latest from the National Hurricane Center in regards to this.
Okay, so you're looking at the kind of big, disorganized, counterclockwise spin that is slowly turning into our tropical system, and then will slowly continue that march towards the Louisiana coastline, potentially, and then well inland from there. Here's the forecast. We've got a hurricane on our hands in about 72 hours, according to the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Hurricane watch watch already in place for parts of the Louisiana coast. That's without even a depression yet, but we have a hurricane watch because that kind of wind is a potential. Of course, the greatest area of concern along the Texas and Louisiana coast for the wind, but there are impacts that are far more reaching than that, Alex. And so we have to cover all of these different facets of the storm.
Yeah, and I want to get you caught up on what we know at this hour in terms of state of emergencies. Already, the governor of Louisiana has declared a state of emergency, and the mayor of New Orleans, LaToya Cantrell, she's issued a state of emergency for that city. Plaquemines Parish in Louisiana now issuing evacuation orders. Voluntary evacuations started this afternoon. Mandatory evacuations for the entire east bank of the parish and for the west bank start at Oakville tomorrow at 6 a.m. Our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, has been on this throughout the week. Again, we've got that potential tropical cyclone still. However, hurricane watches are posted. So I think people are going, all right, this tells me that this thing could really get going. Yeah, this is the new way of handling systems that are developing and forecast to strengthen right on our doorstep. We don't want to have to wait to put up the watches. When it's time, it's 48 hours in advance of when those tropical storm force winds could first arrive, maybe followed by hurricane. And so they want to get out the watch, and they did that earlier today. We got hurricane and tropical storm and storm surge watches. We don't yet have a depression, but that's coming. I don't think it'll come in the next 2 or 3 hours, but maybe later tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. It's just a matter of when the system gains enough organization in terms of its thunderstorm activity and a well-defined center. The aircraft were out there today. They didn't find that, but it is essentially certain that this will become a depression. Pretty darn likely it'll become a tropical storm, and the forecast from the Hurricane Center is for it to become a hurricane. But even they would tell you that is dependent upon exactly where it tracks and how soon it eventually gets back onto land. Right now, it's sitting over those warm waters. It's gradually gaining organization, but it doesn't yet have a whole lot of thunderstorm activity near the circulation center, which is out in here. But once again, like this morning, we're getting an uptick in the thunderstorms, aided by the heating of the day in the southeast Louisiana area. Now we got a flood advisory here in St. Tammany Parish, including the community of Slidell. That'll be crossing Lake Pontchartrain. So it's going to start raining heavily where our Paul Goodloe is in just a little bit, I fear. And there's going to be one more bout of rain, and then it'll end. But I think this will be getting more and more frequent because as this system consolidates and gets more strong, and the right-hand side of the system continues to bring heavy rainfall into places like southeast Louisiana, I think the rainfall totals really will ramp up. The shape of this track, regardless of the details of when it makes that right-hand turn, puts a lot of people on the right-hand side, onshore flow, days of heavy rainfall. And that's why the models, when you go through Monday, are really racking up some scary totals. This could lead to a truly life-threatening rain-induced flood event and river flood event to add on to the problems we've had on the Mississippi River for the last several months. Now, we might not have all the details right with this particular model, the European depiction, but when you have a global model spitting out 2 feet of rainfall, that's concerning. Regardless of exactly what the track is, we're going to have heavy rainfall somewhere, and regardless of exactly how strong it gets. GFS isn't exactly the same, a little bit farther east, but you get the sense from both models that this is not just going to be a coastal event or a coastal region event. Northern Louisiana, much of Mississippi, much of Arkansas, all the way up into Oklahoma, Missouri could get some heavy rain out of this after it goes inland. We've also got the other water problem. I mean, the theme here is to stay out of the water. For the inland flood, turn around, don't drown. Stay out of that water. For the rip current risk, stay out of the water when there's a high risk of rip currents like we've got on the Gulf Coast of Florida and in the Florida Big Bend. The risk is increasing in other parts of the Gulf Coast. Onshore flow will be strengthening. Stay out of the water, especially if the flags and the lifeguards tell you to do so. And the other way to stay out of the water is to evacuate if local officials have told you to do so, especially in these areas that are under a storm surge watch. This is where life-threatening saltwater flooding above normally dry ground could occur, Alex. So many ways the water can get us in these situations. Yeah, and with the amount of rain you're alluding to it expected from this tropical system, we think flash flooding is likely. And much like what we saw this morning in New Orleans, they actually had police putting up barricades in areas that easily flood. We heard from folks and saw reports that public transportation was also halted. A lot of transportation was halted. Dr. Knabb, one man we heard from in one of the interviews earlier said there were stranded cars everywhere. So again, when we get into these flash flooding situations and people are out there on the roads, that's when people find themselves most vulnerable.
Yeah, we've lost at least 43 people this year in this country. None of it due to tropical depressions or tropical storms, from driving into floodwaters and dying in their vehicles in flash flooding. And this is going to bring that hazard and that concern right back to the forefront tonight into tomorrow morning. The risk is there. I just showed you that flood advisory in Slidell, Louisiana, and look what happens as we go over the next couple of days. We're looking into tomorrow. This will become a bigger and bigger threat, and it will start to go farther and farther inland and ramp up. So here is what we're looking at tomorrow night into Friday morning. It's expanding over a larger duration, a larger extent of the coastline. But look what happens when we get to Friday. Now we're talking about likely flash flooding right on the doorstep of New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette. This could get expanded, could get increased, and this will go beyond Friday and Friday night. We have to look at all the way through Monday, Alex, because this is going to be a slow-moving, turning, coastal and inland event.
Yeah, we look up to places like Memphis. We know that whole Mississippi River Valley has been just saturated. We've been talking about it for months. So don't think if you don't live along the coast, this is not going to be an impactful
Last part of the country wanted to see this happen. Don't want it for anybody, but the Mississippi River Valley, my goodness.
It has been drenched over the past few months. Mark?
You know, we don't want to compare everything to Harvey because Harvey was such a different beast. But there's a tropical system that's disorganized right now that has that white color to gray color on the map. That's 30 inches of rain in some of the modeling. That's no good for anybody. It doesn't matter where you are. If that verifies, we're in trouble. New Orleans got a little taste of that flash flooding from earlier today, and we know the threat is not over there yet. Meteorologist Paul Goodlow live in New Orleans. Rain jacket on, right, Paul? We've got a storm coming across the lake coming right towards you.
That's right. Special marine warning for that cell as well, Mark. In fact, the lightning's getting pretty close. This might be our last live hit for a little bit because within 10 miles, it's just not worth the price of admission to be out here with lightning. There's no safe place outside. But let's talk about what you mentioned, the heavy rain this morning. We have video of what happened between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. Between 6 to 9 inches of rain came down just in those 3 hours, and that caused massive flooding. Dozens of cars were stranded. Dozens of people as well were stranded there. Shut down many intersections. City Hall was shut down today. By the way, it's also shut down tomorrow. LSU has canceled classes for Friday, not because of the rain this morning, but because of what's lurking out here in the Gulf of Mexico. Our potential tropical cyclone 2, our potential tropical storm or Hurricane Barry, if the forecasts verify. So that's the big concern. Right now, this cell, which was severe and caused some flash flooding up by Slidell, is coming into New Orleans. A lot of people on edge from what happened this morning, but some residents here in the Big Easy, well, they say rain and flooding and even hurricanes is just part of the price of admission to live here.
We built this bar for a flood because we're used to it. You got to know when you live in a 70119, you get wet from time to time, and you got to adjust to it.
And you have to adjust, but also you have to prepare. And this is a city that sees millions of visitors every single year. In fact, the Delta Sigma Theta sorority convention starts tomorrow, so thousands of more people in town, like Essence was last week, not familiar with the area, not familiar with the weather this area sees. So ask people who live here, ask people at the hotel to prepare yourself and have us with a plan. Don't cancel your plans, but just be aware of what could be happening as we head on through the next several days. I mean, this is an issue for New Orleans well on through Sunday, maybe even Monday, Mark. So this is not just going to be a one morning event thing. This is a multi-day threat of this heavy rain, and what else could brew here in the Gulf that could come this way as well. So we're definitely hoping to prepare for the best, but you know, we got to also prepare for the worst as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, use your apps. Know how far away that lightning is. Right before you came back on, there was quite the bolt there behind you well into the lake. So
saw it.
Yeah, be safe. Practice what we preach, I suppose, and get inside.
Yes.
So we'll hear back from Paul when it's safe to do so. Of course, he mentioned this morning 9 to 10 inches of rain in portions of New Orleans today. That kind of water going to overwhelm just about anywhere, but especially here where the city is below sea level. But even with today's heavy rain event aside, the state on the whole in the midst of a very long-term soggy stretch. Louisiana experiencing its third wettest 12-month period in state history going back to last June. That kind of rainfall sets the stage for the flooding that we had in Baton Rouge, right? This was back in May, so a little bit ago, but Baton Rouge had some intense flooding. The rivers are high. The soil moisture is high. There's a lot going for a flood setup that you just don't want to see. This is the forecast for the Mississippi River. It's been roughly at 16 feet or so. The normal baseline is about 10 feet below that, okay? So this is already way up there. Here's the forecast of the heavy rain and the surge coming in brings it to 20 feet. 20 feet at New Orleans is exactly the height of the levee system. So what that tells me is that this is taking into account somebody opening up some of the spillways and changing that, or else we would continue to see a rise there. Levees would be overtopped at 20 feet. But some of the city is at 10 feet below sea level. So that's 30 feet above you for the top of the water. Can you imagine that, right? It's such a weird concept, but that's the kind of potential there. And then you had the Mississippi so high because of all this. It was the record wettest beginning of the year, right? Year to date, January through June 2019. All of this right here, that all goes into the Mississippi. It's been working its way downstream. There have been areas that have been under the highest flood category, right? The major flooding for weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months and months and months at this point. And now we've got water that's going to be pushed in from the Gulf. That'll stop the flow, at least stop some of it from entering the Gulf. We'll have heavy rain added into that system, so that will continue to add water into the river forecast and the river system. That's a bad combination when that water's all blocked up. It starts overspilling its banks. And when you look at a place like Baton Rouge, there's a little blip here, right? Because you're at 42.2, forecast of 43, coincidentally, also the height of the levee system there. Something, guys, Alex and Dr. Nab, something's going to have to be triggered here to open up some extra spillways and get some water out of this.
Absolutely. The decision makers, they're going to be watching that. Mark kind of referencing that storm surge factor that will be one with this storm as we lose the visible satellite imagery. You're also beginning to see some interesting things as we get our last few views.
Yeah, the last few visible images of the day are often very interesting because you can see some of the overshooting tops really well. And we've been talking about, when does this become a tropical depression? I don't think they're going to make it a tropical depression on the intermediate advisory at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central. But if this area of thunderstorms near the center sticks and lasts for a few hours, they could make it a tropical depression later tonight. But it's academic, Alex. That's the beauty of this process of using the potential tropical cyclone. It looks, smells, feels, and is treated like a tropical depression, including that they can issue storm surge watches. And you see how much onshore flow is pushing into southeast Louisiana already. That's already causing some water levels to rise a little bit.
Right. Not huge amounts, but you can see a little bit in New Orleans, a little bit down in Pilot Town as well. Yeah,
almost a foot above normally dry ground is what that gauge is essentially measuring. But the possibility of this strengthening and coming closer to southeast Louisiana and increasing that onshore flow means we've got a storm surge problem in all likelihood. That's why the storm surge watch has been issued all the way from the immediate coastal area near the Louisiana-Mississippi border all the way around to intercoastal city, but it does not include New Orleans because in this situation it looks like from a storm surge perspective that hurricane risk reduction system would keep the storm surge out, but if they get a whole lot of rain in the city, hope they can pump it all out. If not, they have the option to open some gates to let fresh water out.
Yeah, they have decisions that will need to be made, obviously, at that point. But as you mentioned, water from multiple aspects. And we're going to talk more about the rip current danger as well. Yet another danger in the water.
But if you're in any of these storm surge watch areas, evacuate if your officials tell you to go.
Great advice. So coming up on Weather Underground, we continue to break down the developing threat in the Gulf, including live coverage from New Orleans, bracing for potentially dangerous flooding and thunderstorms right now. We also get you into the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area where severe thunderstorm warnings are in effect from west to east. Fort Worth and Dallas both under warnings. Here in Tarrant County, you can see that storm approaching the Fort Worth area. In addition to strong gusty winds, possible hail. Collin, Dallas, and Tarrant counties, also including Arlington and Dallas, as well as Plano. Well, the city of New Orleans remains on alert for dangerous, even life-threatening flooding. You are looking at scenes from this morning where it wasn't the airport, but really downtown, where 9 to 10 inches of rain fell, leaving streets absolutely swamped, cars stranded, people without public transportation, and a flash flood emergency issued for a time. By the way, on the left-hand side of your screen, you're looking at the storm surge watch currently in effect from Intercoastal City all the way over towards near New Orleans. This in anticipation of potential Tropical Cyclone 2. We are fully prepared and expecting this to soon become Tropical Storm Barry,
I think
at least.
That storm surge watch is important, though, because it means that there's going to be water pushing up towards the mouth of the Mississippi, as all of that water that we've been talking about is still trying to exit. At some point, there's going to be a fight there, and I'm not sure which one's going to win yet.
Yeah, that's the area where there's the potential for life-threatening storm surge at least 3 feet above normally dry ground of salt water. Then you got the fresh water, like you said, coming the other direction, and water falling from the sky in the city inside that hurricane risk reduction system.
Yeah, so kind of a triple whammy for the city of New Orleans. We've got already a lot of water, this morning's water, more heavy rain, so more river flooding issues. Joining us now to talk about what they're anticipating, how you're preparing, Heath Jones with the Army Corps of Engineers. Heath, thank you so much for joining us. I would imagine it's a busy time. You had the heavy rain this morning and gearing up for what's to come.
It is. It's been a very busy day. It's been a busy 8 months for us. We actually been in flood fight down here for over 8 months, and this storm is adding to the end of that flood fight effort that we've been fighting since Hurricane Florence back in October of last year.
And Heath, can you describe the flexibility you have to use your various protection systems to both keep storm surge out, or, if necessary, if you get a whole lot of rain, to let some of that fresh water leave the areas that have perhaps, in a high-end event, overwhelmed the pumps?
So we have really 2 systems in play here. We have the hurricane risk reduction system, which protects against storm surge from the outside. I mentioned that a little bit. We don't think there's really any threat to any of those levees from this storm. And then there's the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project, which we have a couple of options on there. 2 spillways. One is currently open, the Bonnie Carey Spillway. It's open about halfway with about 100,000 CFS flowing through it. We're not going to adjust operations for that structure for this event, but it is currently letting some of that fresh water that came up from the north into the lake. And then, of course, you got the pumping system for the rainfall. That is owned and operated by the city of New Orleans. We've gotten reports on that's in good shape. Of course, big rain events challenge that system that it wasn't designed for, like we saw a little bit this morning. But we're standing by, closing the system down. With the levee districts and our state partners are closing the various gates in the system and along the river in anticipation of the storm surge and the surge pushing up the river.
And Heath, we're looking at a couple of the river gauge forecasts, both for New Orleans and for Baton Rouge. The forecast for the height of that water goes right up to the top of these levees. In your experience, how much extra bandwidth do you have? If that surge is a little bit worse or the fresh rainfall is a little bit worse, how much extra bandwidth do we have to protect the big cities and let even more water out of the system?
So I'll talk about that in 2 parts. We have in the city of New Orleans proper, above where the hurricane system is, there will be forecasted some wave overtopping the system in very discrete points where the system is a little bit low, ramps, access ramps, different things like that. We are working with the state and the levee districts to go put flood fight measures on those. That looks like sandbags, HESCOs, various flood fighting tools, and closing those discrete points up to get the height. That 20-foot forecast at New Orleans does present problems for Lower Plaquemines Parish, where there are some levees that are below the forecasted level, where they will have some sustained overtopping in those areas. If there's any good news in this, it's that it'll be a very flashy event. The water will come up in the river, and if there's any overtopping, it will only last. We're forecasting about 12 hours. So it's not a sustained event where a lot of water is coming over for days. We've done some initial mapping of that. There are some areas with 0 to 2 feet, in some areas with a little bit deeper where the land elevation is a little bit lower down in Plaquemines Parish.
Well, Heath Jones, Army Corps of Engineers, thank you so much. A lot to watch. I think a lot of people who don't live or live near the New Orleans and parts of Louisiana, it is a complicated water system, much different than what you would see in other cities in the U.S.
No, one piece of good news, that hurricane risk reduction system that was built post-Katrina is definitely going to protect them from the storm surge unless this pulls a fast one and gets a lot stronger than we think it will.
And that they're there and watching it and understand that 20-foot forecast means real issues, especially in Plaquemines Parish. So there are some evacuations there, and that they're sandbagging and trying to raise the heights of those levees even further. They know that that's an issue.
Yeah, the freshwater and river flooding, clearly the bigger risk for New Orleans in this event.
All right, well, coming up on Weather Underground, we continue to track our potential tropical cyclone as well as strong thunderstorms moving through the Dallas area right now. The city of New Orleans slammed by extreme rainfall. This really the outer edge of a developing tropical system. We expect this to become Tropical Storm Barry. This was this morning. The threats for the Big Easy, though, far from over. Thanks for staying with us here on Weather Underground. I'm Alex Wilson.
I'm Mark Elliott. 9 to 10 inches of water in the portions of the city this morning. The river levels along the Mississippi could be dangerously close to the levee system. Baton Rouge, New Orleans, several areas that's a risk.
Yeah, and it's not just New Orleans that's concerned about this storm. To talk about how the entire state of Louisiana is preparing is Colin Arnold, director of New Orleans Homeland Security there. The entire state, we've been talking about flooding along this Mississippi River basin, along parts of Louisiana for months, and now you have more rain on the way. What are the messages that you're getting out to the public, both at the coast and inland?
Well, thanks for having me. We're working with, your last interview, Heath, with the Corps of Engineers. We're working with our local flood protection authorities, East and West Bank here in the city, and really just trying to make sure we're coordinating and taking the information that they're giving us, and we're pushing that out to the public. And we do that through, a lot of different ways in the city. We have our website, ready.nola.gov. We're all over social media at NOLA Ready, and we have the option to do text alerts for our local residents to 888-777. You just enter in your zip code. And so we were pushing out. We actually did a WIA alert today, a wireless emergency alert today regarding the flooding. It's been a long day. Happy to say that, we did experience a tremendous amount of rainfall in a short period of time. It does overwhelm our system. But what I'm looking at right now is, through the day, they had 118 out of 120 pumps operational. They had all of their power. I'm talking about the Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans. And for the most part, streets are dry and everything's clear. So what we're doing right now is, we've got our public works people out towing vehicles, courtesy tows, getting cars out of the right of way. That's pretty much completed. Asking residents really just to pay attention, have a plan, have their plan ready, be prepared, have their supplies, and this is a shelter-in-place type scenario that we want to see our residents, staying off of the roads, and for the next couple days, just really hunkering down and making sure that they're out of harm's way. And we want them to make sure they're trying to clean their storm drains as well, especially after an event like this morning, because it tends to flip over garbage cans and put debris into the street, which ends up in the storm drains, and then the storm drains can't do what they're designed to do. So, that's our real concern right now.
And Colin, you mentioned the messages you're getting out to the public, but you have all these different partners. You mentioned the Army Corps, you mentioned the East and West Bank, and the locals that are in charge of managing some of the water. Can you talk a little bit about how you're managing all those different partners that are coming to you as kind of a big guidance entity to try to get all this to move smoothly over the next couple days?
You made the comment earlier that we are unique in our situation with water here, and I think that lends to our relationship with state state, federal, and our local partners here. You know, other city departments that I have to work with on a daily basis. Obviously, we have great communications, but it extends to the Corps, the Coast Guard, our state agencies like Coastal Restoration and the Flood Protection Authority, because this is something that we have been looking at for 8 months now. You know, this unique situation, this situation of concern we are in with a potential storm event and a high river is something that we've taken very seriously. So the communication is constant. It's electronic, it's voice, it's meeting face to face like we did today with the mayor and did an entire briefing with every agency about, you know, how we are going to coordinate and address some of these issues. And we did that at 1 p.m. today after having had 8 inches of rain in about an hour and 45 minutes. So, you know, people called in, people made it into City Hall. It's just we are in a unique situation here, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that our residents are safe.
And Colin, just very quickly, we've heard for the last several months the possibility of the Morganza spillway being open north of Baton Rouge, north of New Orleans. What are you hearing about what would cause that option to need to be invoked?
You know, the Corps he knows best about that, but what we've talked about is that at this point would not be a standard operating procedure for them. So it would be something very unique that they would have to come up with to do that at this point. And I'm not sure how much difference it would make over the next 2 days.
Colin Arnold, we thank you so much, Director of Homeland Security for City of New Orleans. And gosh, as he mentioned, you know, starting off the day, they're trying to prepare for this. And then this morning dealing with, you know, a related but extreme issue.
I mean, there are long-term studies and kind of worst-case scenarios of a significant tropical system coming in at the same time that you already have river flooding in New Orleans. This might not be the worst-case scenario, but it certainly ain't the best case either.
No, absolutely not. And we're going to continue to monitor, obviously, the situation there around New Orleans, but other parts of the south central and southeastern U.S. where dangerous flooding is a possibility out of our possible tropical storm Barry.
Yeah, this is probably an inevitability at this point.
Think so.
It's coming. We'll talk about just how far inland those impacts will go coming up.
So we have an intermediate public advisory on potential tropical cyclone number 2. This is no change from the advisory that was at 5 p.m. in terms of the main specifics of the system. They have issued an intermediate public advisory, no new change in the track and the intensity forecast. That will happen at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central Time. The reason the intermediate advisories are coming out is because there are watches and warnings in effect for land areas, and that is the procedure, whether it's potential tropical cyclone or it is actually a tropical depression. Now, if we look at the visible imagery, I want to show you what is going on in the middle of the system, which is guaranteed to become a depression at some point very soon, and that could happen later tonight. Now, the imagery overlaying with where the hurricane hunters have been today shows that they've been investigating it, but they haven't learned anything new from the aircraft to tell them that it crossed over into tropical depression status. They found it sufficiently disorganized. It was still in the development stages. A NOAA plane is out there providing a little bit of extra data, but the key thing that I see going on the satellite imagery is that, the center of circulation is somewhere in this general vicinity. That's where it's trying to consolidate. If you look at the last few visible images of the day, there's a blowup of thunderstorms pretty close to the center. If those thunderstorms persist near the center and stay involved with the circulation center, and they have some idea from the satellite or the NOAA plane that the circulation center has become well-defined, they could declare this a tropical depression at 11 p.m. But you know what? That's mostly going to be an academic change. It's not going to change how this system is handled. They're already watches and warnings up. They have already got the track and intensity forecasts out. And what they'll do at 11 p.m. is update the track and intensity forecast. We still have these flood advisories in southeast Louisiana. So New Orleans is about to get in on another bout of heavy rainfall. But here's the track and intensity forecast that wasn't changed at all here on the intermediate advisory. And this is what will change at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central, guys. So we'll watch for that. It's the same pace of things as when you have a tropical depression.
Absolutely. I think it does, however, change the public perception when you start getting either a depression or a storm, maybe even a hurricane. Gets people's attention, for sure.
Sure does. And when it gets a name, and when it becomes a hurricane, boy, then it really gets attention. But at least we've got the hurricane watch up already.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk more about the hurricane hunters and what they're doing in just a second. And speaking of those hurricane hunters, they are flying throughout the day today and over the next couple of days into potential tropical cyclone 2, and then maybe even to Barry when it is Barry, right? The planes that they are on are highly specialized aircraft, and Jim Cantori shows us the fleet.
I want to introduce you to the Hurricane Hunters, a fleet of 13 planes that provides us with crucial information about what a tropical system, whether it be a depression, a storm, or a hurricane, is doing and where it may go as we go on in time. First aircraft, the NOAA Orion P-3. Great names for this, too. How about Miss Piggy and Kermit the Frog? Believe me, that's what they call these names. Those are their nicknames. These planes fly anywhere from 1,500 feet to 10,000 feet. They can do missions like the Hurricane Hunter aircraft I'm going to show you, but most importantly, they contain some really cool instruments for research. On the front, the Gus probe. Looks kind of like a little barber pole. Remember the old barber poles the barbershops used to go to? On the bottom side, we have a horizontal radar. What does that storm look like? Is it symmetric? Is it round? Is it oblong? All right, that gives us a good idea of the structure of the storm. And on the tail, when the plane moves through the storm, it can actually look at the towers of precipitation. How high are these towers? Are they growing? Are they weakening in time? So some great information about what's going on with the physics of that storm that can be thrown into some of the intensity models that we have. All right, these guys are the heavy lifters. We have 10 of these planes. These are the WC-30, 130J Hurricane Hunters. They're going in and out of the eye of the storm. They're going right through the eye wall of the storm. Imagine a 150-mile-per-hour hurricane. They're flying in and out of that thing several times during their 12-hour mission. All right, and they use a radar on the nose to actually look at where they're going into this thing. But believe me, it is a wild ride, to say the least. Once inside the plane, the men and women meteorologists there doing these 12-hour missions provide an important role of what's happening with the storm. So imagine a big cube. They're trying to get a volume of information from the outer sides of the storm right into the eye, and it's real time. So they throw out these instruments called the dropson, and those dropsons get that information for us. They also have an SFMR instrument, which is a microwave instrument that looks at the turbidity of the ocean and also estimates the intensity of the storm. Just an awesome, awesome plane. All right, last but never least, I want to introduce you to Gonzo. This is the G4 aircraft. This is mainly for high-altitude missions. What is the atmosphere like that storm is moving into? Is it dry? Does it contain a lot of wind shear? That data is gathered by this plane, put into computer models to spit out a better forecast for us down the road as a threatening storm makes its way toward the United States of America. The fleet of 13 Hurricane Hunter aircraft, a central arsenal for us in the United States.
Thank you, Jim. You know, a couple of those aircraft have been out in the storm today. They continue to do so and dropping instruments through the atmosphere all the way down to the Gulf surface, collecting data along the way. So this goes directly into our forecasts, into specialized hurricane models, as well as the big global models to some degree. And so by tomorrow, we might have a much better handle than, say, if these flights weren't happening. Oh, absolutely.
So we've had two different flights today, one by the Air Force, one by NOAA. One is at low levels. The Air Force were flying at about 1,000 feet during the day today in a low-level investigative mission to see how well-defined the low-level circulation is to help the Hurricane Center declare whether or not this had become a depression or not. And what that plane found was a lot of little isolated swirls, but not one well-defined circulation center. That plane has gone home back to Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi, Mississippi. But now we've got a NOAA P-3 that's out there. They took off from Lakeland at about 4 p.m. Eastern time today, and they're doing what we call a lawnmower pattern, and they're flying at a much higher altitude. So they're not down at 1,000 feet. They're at over 25,000 feet. And they're doing this lawnmower pattern, and they're dropping dropsons at a variety of locations. When their mission is done later tonight, they will have dropped some 20 dropsons. Now, they're not primarily tasked to get data from inside the storm and relay it to the Hurricane Center to help them declare they're a depression or not. They're primarily, in this mission tonight, getting data to go into the computer forecast models, those dedicated hurricane models. So like Mark said, these data collected by NOAA tonight, the Kermit plane, the NOAA 42P3 plane, that could help the hurricane models that we'll see come out tomorrow morning. But then, Mark, as we go on through the next few days, the Air Force will start flying at higher and higher altitude as it gets stronger, and those data will help us get a better handle on the intensity and size.
Absolutely. So the Skyhopper living up to its nickname tonight as it's going in those higher levels and really setting the stage, getting all that information out from around the storm, where it is forming, and that goes into the modeling.
Yeah, we're so fortunate to have these resources.
Absolutely. And of course, with all that new data coming in, we've got a lot to continue to follow for you. We're breaking down all of the impacts, what you can expect with regards to all of the big problems from this storm. And of course, we have team coverage headed in that direction.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Griffith, live in New Orleans, Louisiana. We had some thunderstorms kind of chase us off, and the lightning is now far enough in the distance where it's still lighting up the sky, but we're safe from where we are right now. It's more than 10 miles away. That's some good news. And we're seeing a break in the rain, which is something we need. Look at this video from this morning around New Orleans, where we picked up between 7 to 10 inches of rain, and many areas picked that up within just 3 hours. And one location is right around the Superdome. And even hours later, after the rain had stopped, things were drying up. We still saw the aftermath of cars kind of stranded on the median on the road, even after the water has receded. But at time to time, the water was waist to chest deep in some streets here because they picked up so much rain across the area. The good news is we've had a time to dry out, but the bad news is we can still see more rain come through, not just from today, but tomorrow and on through the weekend because of a potential tropical cyclone. The city under a state of emergency. The mayor issued that today. The governor of Louisiana, John Bell Edwards, also declared a state of emergency for the state of Louisiana because of the expected heavy rain coming from whatever does emerge out of the Gulf and come into Louisiana. It's definitely, the models are pointing towards heavy rain. Could be the long-lasting calling card and impact from whatever does develop in the Gulf. The forecast right now is a potential hurricane, but it's all about impacts. Impacts, that heavy rain. Remember that other previous systems, Tropical Storm Allison, Hurricane Harvey, it was that rainfall, that inland flooding, which killed so many people, not the winds of a system. I'm going to bring in Dr. Rick Knabb. Sorry, Dr. Knabb.
That's okay, Paul. Good to see you.
And talk about this forecast here. Because, we're talking about a potential hurricane, and now that the city of New Orleans is no longer in that cone, kind of tell our viewers what that cone means. The cone is the actual center. It doesn't mean that we're free from impacts by far, does it?
No, that cone is just where the center of circulation of the system is probably going to go. And we can't even guarantee that the system stays within that cone, and that cone could shift around as this slow-moving system takes that gradual turn to the right into Louisiana. But let's say it does stay somewhere within that cone. The details are important because if it stays in the right-hand side of the cone, maybe it doesn't stay offshore as long and doesn't get as strong. Farther on the left side of the cone, it stays over water longer, it gets stronger. But either way, Paul, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and a lot of places on the right-hand side of that track are going to be, for days, on the right-hand side, onshore flow, really wet side of the system. And what you saw this morning could be a small introduction to what could be happening for days to come with a life-threatening rain-induced flood problem.
And that is so possible with this juicy tropical area mass. For a while today, our dew point was at 80 degrees, which is, 75 is really tropical. 80 is just unheard of. And all that is more moisture in the atmosphere, which can fall as rain like we saw this morning. So a big concern of what that happens with that track. So Mark and Alex were definitely concerned about where that goes and the impacts, the bands of rain that are always spiraling around these systems. If they train right over New Orleans, it could be a disaster. But again, we're always hoping for the best, but a snapshot was this morning and how bad it could be, and that was just 3 hours. Amazing.
And you got to prepare for the worst. Paul, we know there are a lot of areas that could get in on that heavy rain. It's just a matter of who. That still remains the question.
Yeah, so Dr. Knabb, when you look at a slow-moving storm that's going to have a huge fetch of Gulf of Mexico on that right side with onshore winds, that adds the complexity and some of these impacts that'll last so much longer because of that slow motion.
Yeah, slow motion is almost always bad when it comes to dealing with tropical systems, but you add in the little wrinkle here that it's going to be curving around to the right. When you are on the right-hand side of that curve and it's slow, that puts you in days of heavy rainfall and the potential for life-threatening flooding, and it's going to be a strengthening system, we think, along the way as well. We don't think we are going to have a tropical storm here in the next few hours, but we could, by 11 p.m. tonight, have a tropical depression. If not, it'll be tomorrow morning. That's a certainty. Storm is likely, and it's even possible that we get a hurricane, especially when it gets closer to landfall. Look at the overshooting tops of those thunderstorms right near the center of circulation. That is what could be the true transformation of this into a tropical depression. When you have organized thunderstorm activity around a well-defined center, then you've got a depression, but it's hard to tell just from the satellite if that's happening. Got a NOAA plane out there that might be able to provide a little bit of help on that. Here's that turn to the right and the forecast of intensification. Hurricane Center forecasting a hurricane, but even they would tell you that's not a certainty. There's a lot of details here. Again, a track farther to the right, it's less time over water, but also even over water, just can't really predict how fast it will get that inner core together and just how strong it might get, but it's reasonable to forecast a hurricane knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty in that. And when you look at the rainfall forecast, this is the biggest concern at the coast and well inland for inland freshwater flooding, flash flooding, and river flooding, because this is all going to happen over the lower Mississippi River Valley where the rivers have been high for months. The soil moisture is tremendously high, so we've got to promise ourselves. Let's all say it together. Turn around. Don't drown. We've lost too many lives in this country this year due to people driving on water-covered roads. This is another situation not to do that.
And that's the most easy thing you can help yourself with. Well, we've got a lot more ahead on tonight's show, including tracking our danger out on the Gulf Coast. All right, now on Weather Underground, a dangerous situation developing from Texas to Florida tonight. We're tracking potential tropical cyclone 2, very likely to become tropical storm Barry, perhaps even a hurricane, with the Louisiana and the Texas coastlines very much in the path of this potential storm.
Hurricane expert Dr. Nab is breaking down each and every threat and showing you why you can expect significant impacts from this, including flooding, surge, rip currents, wind, and all this could go well away from the center of the storm.
Yeah, New Orleans already feeling the brunt of this system with a flash flood emergency earlier today. We have live coverage in the Crescent City.
And we'll discuss why today could be just the beginning of what could be a very long duration and potentially destructive flood event for areas along the Gulf Coast. It's all coming up right now on Weather Underground.
Yeah, hurricane watches have been issued for parts of coastal Louisiana. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Alex Wilson.
I'm Mark Elliott. There is a state of emergency in place for Louisiana tonight as our potential tropical cyclone gets better organized over those very warm Gulf waters. Yeah, I want to check in with our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Nab, with more on the very latest advisory coming in from the National Hurricane Center.
Yeah, this was an intermediate public advisory issued at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time. So this is what is done, whether it's a potential tropical cyclone or a depression, storm, or hurricane, when there are coastal watches up for land areas, and that's the case. And so they issued this intermediate public advisory, but no significant changes. The winds have stayed the same, the motion's the same, the designation as a potential tropical cyclone is the same, and it's still essentially guaranteed to become a depression later tonight or tomorrow. And the reason it's at least possible that it could be later tonight is near the circulation center. We've got a pretty good uptick in the thunderstorm activity, getting more and more involved with the circulation center. And if they can determine, based on the NOAA plane that's out there or based on satellite data, that it's got a well-defined center, this might be enough thunderstorm organization to declare it a depression. But if not, that is almost certainly to happen tomorrow. And the forecast is for it to strengthen to a tropical storm and to a hurricane. Is all of that guaranteed? No, the tropical storm is darn close. Hurricane, not as much, but it's a reasonable possibility because the waters are extremely warm over the northern Gulf, near 90 degrees in many spots. And the longer it stays over water as a slow-moving system, the more it will be able to tap into that fuel and ramp up to a hurricane. There's even a possibility of some rapid intensification in that last day or two before landfall. A shorter trip toward land on the right-hand side of the cone might not give it as much time to strengthen as much. But because of all of that, there are hurricane watches up. But I wanted to highlight again the water hazards. The main way to stay safe from what is probably going to become Barry is to stay out of the water. Water of all kinds. Don't drive into water-covered roadways. This is the flash flood risk that maybe feet of rainfall could cause. And this is what the model is showing from the European, and the GFS is very, very similar. This is a tremendous amount of rainfall, a potentially life-threatening situation that could cause flooding near the coast and well inland, and add to the river flood problem. The other water problem is the rip current risk that is high. Stay out of the water where there's a high rip current risk. Obey the flags, obey the lifeguards. Too many people die in rip currents. And then the last water to stay out of is the salt water. If you're in this storm surge watch where there's the possibility of life-threatening storm surge coming inland from the Gulf of Mexico, you got to follow the instructions from emergency managers to evacuate. So here's where that hurricane watch is, and it's placed about 2 days before the expected arrival of winds of tropical storm force, and then followed by possibly hurricane conditions. This means hurricane force winds are possible somewhere in this watch area within the next couple of days, but it also factors in the possibility that it does or does not become a hurricane. This is all hurricane watch at this point, and any one spot in the areas here highlighted in green have a 10 to 20% chance in this highest risk area of getting at their spot hurricane force winds sustained in the next 5 days. The watch doesn't go this far because it's too far out into the future. But these are the areas that could get hurricane force winds, much greater chances of sustained winds of tropical storm force, not just at the coast, but inland as well. And when is this all going to start? The most likely time for winds of tropical storm force to arrive would be on Friday morning, southeast Louisiana, Friday night, farther west on the coast of Louisiana. But if you want to be really sure you're ahead of the game, get ready by tomorrow night and Friday morning, as the early arrival is what you want to be sure about. So, guys, the main issue here is that we've got tonight and tomorrow to prepare for the winds and the water.
And Dr. Knabb, on that visible imagery that you were showing us with those thunderstorms that were getting a little bit more persistent near the center, if that becomes the center, does that give you any hints as to which part of the cone the current track may be leaning towards, the kind of further out to sea and lasting longer over the water, or maybe being closer to land?
Not a whole lot, but what it does do, if that is where the center forms and it really becomes well defined, is it gives the next set of model runs a better starting point and a better defined starting point, and then maybe tomorrow morning's forecasts and model runs will have the benefit of starting from something that's a little more certain. So
it does seem like a jump from where we were looking even a few hours ago. That those storms weren't, you know, that low-level swirl of several that we were watching. Some of those were still off the Florida Panhandle. That's almost at the Louisiana coast already.
Yeah, therein lies the challenge of dealing with a system that has multiple circulations and not a well-defined center. And I may not have it exactly right where that well-defined center will settle, but that blow up of thunderstorms right there is telling, and that might be where the center could be trying to form.
All right, Dr. Knabb, thanks so much. We'll get back to Dr. Knabb in just a bit, because there's so much more to dissect with this developing system.
Yeah, heck, it's already caused problems today. This is New Orleans earlier this morning. City saw 9 to 10 inches of rain in just a few hours, so obviously you can see what that did to a very flood-prone city already.
I can't imagine what that bike ride was like.
No.
That guy biking through, completely covered up in rain through the tires. And then your car ride wasn't much better. So many people abandoned their cars. Flash flood emergency was issued, and still, sir, potential for flash flooding watch through tomorrow night. I would argue that will probably be extended even further.
Right, because we really think this is the beginning of flood problems for the New Orleans area. Paul Goodlow is there. We're going to get a live update from him in just 5 minutes.
So let's talk a little bit more about what is happening right now, what we know right now across the state.
Yeah, Governor of Louisiana has declared a state of emergency. The mayor of New Orleans, LaToya Cantrell, has also issued a state of emergency for her city. And Plaquemines Parish is now issuing evacuation orders, voluntary evacuation, mandatory evacuations for the entire East Bank of the parish, and for the West Bank. They start at Oakville tomorrow at 6 a.m. And, you know, we talk about how water is really our biggest concern with this system. The flash flooding from this morning, perhaps giving people a sense of what this could bring in terms of huge downpours, all the standing water there in the New Orleans area. Dr. Knabb, we look now at the outlook for flash flooding in the coming days, and it's a lot of the same areas over and over again before we begin to shift that threat even farther inland.
Yeah, isn't that a scary thought that we're already getting flash flooding before the bulk of the moisture really comes bodily onshore, and the flash flood risk will be extending and expanding and getting worse. This is tonight into tomorrow morning, essentially the outer bands of a developing tropical depression. But we've already had a flood advisory here northeast of Lake Pontchartrain in the Slidell area. It's getting more and more dangerous on the roads as every day goes on, and starting with how bad it was this morning in New Orleans. So tomorrow night, Friday morning, the risk stays elevated here in southeast Louisiana, kind of on the doorstep in New Orleans. But look what happens when we get Friday into Friday night, Saturday morning. Likely flash flooding there in southern Louisiana. In New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette could be in on it, Mobile, Biloxi, Gulfport. And that's just the beginning. It's hard to say. But when you look past Saturday morning and look all the way into Monday, you take this whole 5-day forecast track. Look at what the European model is spitting out here, Alex. This is very concerning.
Once you get into those, really bright colors, the whites essentially, you're talking feet now of rain, 2 feet, 24 inches. Plus, perhaps 30 inches of rain.
Yeah, and it's important. Yes, and it's important to point out this might not be exactly where the heaviest rains fall. This is track dependent, it's structure dependent. But when a global model spits out numbers like this, like Alex says, this is very, very high risk for a high-end flash flood event. And keep in mind, this is all going to be falling in the lower Mississippi River Valley. I don't want to see this much rain in Arkansas, up into Missouri. The rivers are way too high, the soil moisture way too loaded with water, and the GFS is a little different, but the same flavor.
Right, exactly. It's not necessarily the location right now that we're concerned about, but that the potential is there for some really, really high rainfall totals.
Slow-moving systems in the tropics, we don't like them.
Absolutely, Mark.
Yeah, and it's numbers that you don't see all that often.
Right.
So it grabs your attention, and hopefully it's grabbing everyone who's watching attention too, because people need to think about where they are, where their home is. Do you live in an area that floods on a normal thunderstorm type of day? It's not going to be able to handle 30 inches of rain. Okay, so that can go into your family's planning when you're looking at a forecast like that. New Orleans got a little taste of that earlier today with the flash flooding that we saw, and the threat from there is certainly not over. Meteorologist Paul Goodlow in New Orleans tonight. Paul, this is a frightening situation. The pumps there can handle a decent amount of water each hour, but 30 inches of water, there's no infrastructure on earth that can do that.
Yeah, Mark, you used the analogy of New Orleans got a taste of that this morning. No. They got a fire hose this morning. Not a taste, not a drop, not just an appetizer. They got, 6 to 10 inches of rain this morning, and much of that fell within 3 hours this morning, caused massive flooding. And we have video from this morning, and a lot of the flooding was right around Canal Street, even around Superdome, the weather station there at Superdome, 6.24 inches from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Talk about messing up your rush hour. And City Hall was closed because of that as well. Closed also tomorrow. The mayor has instituted a state of emergency for the city, the governor for the state as well. In fact, the mayor was talking about what people should do right now ahead of whatever is lurking as we head to the rest of the week.
Now is absolutely the time to pay attention. Heed every single warning that comes from the city of New Orleans, and as you listen to media outlets, pay attention to all tornado as well as flash flood warnings. Be prepared for the impacts.
And the mayor mentioned tornado warnings again here in Lake Pontchartrain. There was video of funnel clouds and water spouts this morning right here. I'm on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. So anytime you have a tropical system get close to or make landfall, there's also potential for that as well. But everything that happened this morning, the flooding, the water spouts, the tornado, that was not associated with our potential tropical cyclone. That's still yet to be seen what that will bring us here. But Mark also mentioned the pumps here. The city of New Orleans has 120 pumps because they are below sea level. Lake Pontchartrain, this is sea level here. Some say it's not a lake. Some say it's an estuary because it's affected by the tide. Bottom line is this is sea level. The city is 3 to 9 feet below that, so they pump out water. They work pretty well the first hour. Can pump an inch of rain out in 1 hour. Then after that, a ½ inch every single hour. And if some of these forecasts are calling for, 3, 8, 6, 20, 30 inches of rain, that's going to be a problem for the city if it happens to pull here. Now, granted, it might not only be, maybe 6 or 8 inches over a couple of days. They can handle that, but what if it's not? What if you have that worst case scenario? That is what you have to be prepared for, and then hope for just a couple of inches, and we kind of dodged this one. But that is yet to be seen. Right now, it's time to prepare. Mark?
Absolutely, Paul. Good information there. And of course, it's not happening on an island, right? It's not happening on its own. You have to think about all that's happened leading into this event. And that's where the river flooding comes into play. And you notice this white line here. That's where we've been the past couple of days, right about at 16 feet on our river height. Usually that's about 10 feet lower at this time of year. So this is already a high baseline. You add the rain and the storm surge, you quick jump to 20 feet. 20 feet is where the levee system around New Orleans really stops protecting much of the area. Some parts of the area, as we heard from the Army Corps, 20 feet is too high already. They're actively sandbagging to try to raise the height of some of these levees. So 20 feet is
It's a big number. Mark is really getting that point that 20-foot number is critical.
Yeah.
Because at 20 feet, levees will be over top. Now, there's a delicate balance here between forecasting the rainfall, the storm surge, the river behavior, but also forecasting or including in the forecast what humans can do with the infrastructure, what you can do with spillways, what you can do with different barriers.
Yeah, because there are a lot of things. We talked about this earlier with the emergency managers, that other cities don't think about or work with the types of infrastructure that they have. So they're thinking, all right, if we do this, what repercussions does that have? And if we do this, it's all about maintaining kind of a balance and keeping in mind who could be at risk when you open one versus close another.
And imagine the challenges of dealing with everything that's happened up to this point, the snow melt, the heavy rain in the spring, and the high flows on the Mississippi River and every river flowing into it. Add in the rain we're going to see in the next several days, and then add in the storm surge component. Now, the good news here is the hurricane risk reduction system around New Orleans is probably going to protect them from the storm surge in this event, but there's going to be areas outside of that that are going to be dealing with an increasing onshore flow. We already have onshore flow into southeast Louisiana from the east. So look at this, Alex, already seeing some gauges responding to that.
Yeah, we're seeing that higher or that water over normally dry ground, and that push. The water will be the threat from the surge or from the flooding, but also surge could be an issue in some of these coastal areas, obviously determined by the strength, too.
Yeah, and that is very track and intensity dependent, and it's size dependent. The horizontally larger systems can create more storm surge. So as this moves farther west and strengthens, then it's going to push more of that salt water into these areas that are under a storm surge watch. Potential for life-threatening storm surge. Evacuate if your local officials tell you to go.
Yes, listen to those emergency managers. We've heard it so many times. I wish I would have. Well, coming up on the show, we continue to break down this developing threat in the Gulf, including coverage from New Orleans with Paul Goodlow. Well, the city of New Orleans remains on alert for dangerous, even life-threatening flooding over the coming days. On the right-hand side of the screen, you are looking at scenes from this morning's heavy rain, the threat for more flash flooding, more rapidly rising rivers, all on the table. Of course, right now we're looking at potential tropical cyclone 2, but expecting tropical storm Barry within the next really 24 hours.
It really
Not
is
sooner.
It really is incredible seeing the play here of all the different ways the water is coming towards New Orleans.
Right.
We've got the rivers are high. There's river flooding. We've got rainfall flooding. We've got potential surge flooding.
A lot
just
on the table. And when you look at the city of New Orleans and the waterways and how they manage them, it's a very complicated system. Paul Goodloe, he's already in the city of New Orleans. Paul, I would imagine this is really the top story as people prepare and also worry about what the water could bring to the city.
Definitely. You mentioned water. We have Lake Pontchartrain next to me. We got the Mississippi River as we head south of me. We have canals which drain the city to the lake, which also can have a lot of flooding and perhaps even walls that could be topped as well. So there's so many ways water could enter the city, as well as from the clouds, the rain. You showed that video from this morning. 6 to 10 inches in 3 hours in some locations here caused massive flooding, and the city is below sea level. So we're talking the pumps can handle rain, but not that type of rainfall. We're talking if they get like 1.5 inches in 2 hours, that's okay. But, 3, 6 inches, even 10 inches in 3 hours, that can't be pumped out. So we're going to have some flooding, and our forecast is for several more inches of rain to come through. A lot of people are concerned because this is a city that people visit all the time. Millions of people every single year, let alone from Super Bowls or perhaps even Mardi Gras, just in general. There was the Essence Festival last week. Tomorrow starts the sorority Delta Sigma Theta convention in town. We're talking to people on the plane even coming in this morning who are concerned of all the flooding going on this morning, and that's not associated with what's brewing in the Gulf of Mexico over the next 24 to 48 hours as well. So I'm not saying cancel your plans, but if you are planning to come here, bring the rain boots, bring the rain gear, prepare to get wet if you're spending time outdoors, and also ask questions from people who live here or work at your hotel. What do you do if you have severe weather, flooding, tornadoes, or even a hurricane or tropical storm threaten you? Ask the questions, get the information, have a plan, and stay safe. Guys?
Yeah, excellent information and good advice there from Paul.
Yeah, just, if you're not familiar, just say, all right, so if this happens, where should I go? The locals, they know, and obviously they're passing on the information at the hotels from emergency managers in the area.
And the local kind of officials are already working on trying to protect portions of the city because, let's face it, with a forecast surge of about 20 feet, some of the area starts to have overtopping at 18 to 19 feet. So that's a big problem. This is our disorganized swirl. We will see if by 11 o'clock Eastern Time advisory, if this kind of pulsing center point that we have jumps over to here where we have some very persistent thunderstorms that are near that one of the swirls that we've been following today. The forecast will then also be changing by about 11 o'clock Eastern Time. As you could see, that center point jump to over here. What will that do to the wind speeds? How much time is left over the water? Time will tell. We'll see if those thunderstorms hold together over the next several hours. Alex and Dr. Nab, over to you.
Yeah, Dr. Nab, we've talked about the flash flooding, the river flooding, the storm surge potential. But there's another danger that comes with water. And for a lot of communities, it's going to come well away from that forecast cone and also well away from the bad weather. You're going to want to go to the beach, but the rip current danger will be high.
Yeah, rip currents are so overlooked by many folks, don't realize that it's one of the deadliest weather-related hazards that we deal with. And in tropical storms and hurricanes, they have taken so many lives. And often it occurs far away from the circulation center where the weather's good, but the onshore flow is kind of nasty and perpendicular to the coast and producing that rip current risk. Anytime you have a low in the Gulf of Mexico, somebody is going to get some onshore flow that enhances that rip current risk. And also, if you look at the Gulf Coast of Florida, all the way from Naples around to Pensacola, generally speaking, weather has not been too bad. And as this system moves farther to the west, the weather won't be all that bad. But even today, the rip current risk is high in places like Sanibel, Fort Myers, Clearwater Beach, Panama City Beach, over to Destin. And this risk is going to get worse. And Alex, the irony here is the farther the storm gets away from you, in some places, the worse the onshore flow gets. Florida Panhandle, heads up.
Yeah, a lot of communities need to be on alert. Listen to the lifeguards. Just like we say, listen to the emergency managers, listen to the lifeguards. They are going to be watching out for you.
Yeah, and even when it's well inland, then nearly the entire northern Gulf Coast gets this strong onshore flow after the storm seems to be gone.
Right, so it's prolonged. So, Mark, just because you're not dealing with the worst of the weather doesn't mean you don't have any problems.
Absolutely. So many impacts from this that we'll continue to dissect for you right here on Weather Underground. However, we've got all our crews headed out into the field. They're going to bring you live coverage over the next couple of days from directly in those impacted communities.
The city of New Orleans slammed by extreme rainfall from the outer fringes or edges of our potential tropical cyclone. We anticipate this to become Tropical Storm Barry very soon. The threats for the Big Easy far from over. So this morning, really just an appetizer, so to speak.
It's going to be interesting to see if the rain from today event goes into the storm totals or not. Because it is certainly on that circulation, and yet we don't have a name to anything.
Right.
We don't have a depression yet. So we'll see what they do with that. Alex Wilson, Mark Elliott, we're following all of the impacts from this eventually developing Barry, right? We know this is coming at this point.
We know it's coming. We know that water's flowing into the Mississippi. River levels could get dangerously close to topping the city's levees. Paul Goodloe is there as the city prepares for the storm.
And guys, you're talking about that rain is part of the whole totals from the storm. And the thing is, those storms came in from the north and east. They didn't come in from the southeast or from the south or southwest from the Gulf of Mexico. They came in from land. Yeah, a little bit of Lake Pontchartrain, but imagine what happens when you have that nonstop tropical feed coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. That could give us a lot more rain for perhaps a longer duration. I'm hoping it doesn't happen. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to wish it into existence, but these are the things we're trying to prepare ourselves for. These are some of the things that the models are giving us kind of hints on what could happen in terms of totals. You don't get those totals unless you have that constant feed coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. And we can show the video from this morning of 3 hours. Some areas picked up more than 6 inches of rain in 3 hours, and some areas picked up close to 3 inches in 1 hour. It was literally, just the skies and heavens opened up. My father used to call some heavy rain storms back in the day frog stranglers, but, it's that type of rainfall rates, and people were caught off guard. People were stranded as well. But some people are saying that heavy rain and flooding, well, that's just a part of living here in the Crescent City.
We're just completely stranded here. I mean, we came down and this happened all within a matter of hours, and now no one can get anywhere. They've shut down all public transportation. There's just disabled cars all over the road. It's like a hurricane. It's actually like a hurricane.
There is a tropical storm or a storm surge watch for the parishes just south of here in New Orleans, as well as a flash flood watch for much of Louisiana, including areas east of here, right on through tomorrow evening. And wouldn't be shocked to see that extend as we have more rain approach with whatever is forming in the Gulf of Mexico. So we're definitely maybe just the appetizer or the pre-appetizer of what we could see as we get through tomorrow. Then we got Friday, Saturday, and some of the models are saying Saturday and Sunday could be some very heavy rain across much of Louisiana, including portions of East Texas and southern Mississippi. So a huge part of the Gulf Coast still has to be on guard for the next several days to come. Bess?
Absolutely. Paul Goodloe, thank you so much. Dr. Knabb, we look at a place like New Orleans, we know they're already vulnerable. We know they've already been swamped with rainfall. So you look at huge rainfall totals possible, not necessarily in New Orleans, but absolutely possible there. Really gives you pause and makes you nervous for this one.
Yeah, it's one of the cities at great risk, like Baton Rouge, like Lafayette, Louisiana. And it's not just Louisiana. Places farther north, this is not just going to be a coastal rain event. It's going to be an inland one as well. And it is a life-threatening heavy rainfall and inland flood threat, and the river flooding will be adding to that. We've got a potential tropical cyclone, pretty much almost guaranteed tropical cyclone sometime tonight or tomorrow morning, and this will almost certainly also become Tropical Storm Barry. We're losing the visible imagery of the day, but we see that blow up of thunderstorms near where the center might be trying to really organize and become well-defined, as it was not earlier today. The radar imagery starting to show some lightning returns in that area, so that's the center of my attention right now in terms of trying to determine if this has become a depression or not, but it's a matter of time. It's going to strengthen over these warm waters that are near 90 degrees or exceeding 90 degrees in some places along the track. So the longer it spends over that warm water, the stronger it could get. Here's the European model depiction of the increase in those colors, the intensity of that circulation. Look at it on Friday, just offshore and not moving very quickly. So it has time to strengthen, and the slow motion lengthens the duration of the rainfall, and look how well it holds together over land. The GFS model is not too much different than that. And by the way, look at upper level high pressure in those white traveling lines. There's no wind shear of any significance to limit the strengthening and tear it apart. And the GFS brings it into Louisiana by the weekend as probably a strong tropical storm or a hurricane. And with that shape of the track, the main concern, in addition to the wind, in addition to the storm surge, in addition to the heavy rainfall, is the possibility of a coastal and inland event. Rip currents, storm surge, heavy rainfall, and wind are all on the table, and we're going to break down some of the details on where those could occur when we come back.
A little bit of a soggy walk in Memphis tonight as storms have moved on through. Doesn't really look like it's slowing down the traffic too badly at this point, but you can see a little bit of that sheen on the road from the headlights because some storms have already come through the Memphis area. Now, the line of storms came by, no longer severe in the Memphis area. That is the good news, but there's still some lingering rain nearby. South side of the area, certainly worse in Memphis. This is only important because we have the potential of all that tropical moisture coming back from the Gulf, coming into this very area. Now, do we know exactly how far north it's going to go? Will it be kind of shunted off towards Little Rock, or does it bend towards Nashville? Not set in stone yet. But anywhere that's getting too much rain now, the grounds are going to be saturated. Flooding will be easier as we go through the weekend. Storms came through the Dallas area, and really through Fort Worth in particular. The worst of the flooding and really the worst of the severe weather is now west of Fort Worth, but right on I-20 with some wind and some hail that are still ongoing. Look at this big arc of thunderstorms, right? They're all connected from Texas all the way to Memphis. That's a big complex that's headed south. We're also watching some storms across the Ohio Valley and along I-75, so difficult travel if you're heading into northern portions of Ohio on 75 because of hail and wind that are going over the highway. And look at the flood warnings as well, just dotted around the Indianapolis metro area because of slow-moving thunderstorms. On any other night, Alex, these storms may have kind of been the big story, and we have spent a lot of time on it, and yet we know what's waiting in the wings, which is just kind of making everything look like small potatoes right now.
Absolutely, especially when you talk about the rainfall totals that could come along with this one. Right now, potential tropical cyclone 2, but as we've told you throughout the show, we anticipate soon enough this will be Tropical Storm Barry as we go through the remainder of the week, working over parts of the Gulf Coast before likely moving onshore somewhere between East Texas and the state of Louisiana. But the rainfall and other effects will be felt even outside of that cone. We look at the European model rainfall through Monday, and you can see there are some areas where 2 feet or more possible, say around and just west of the Baton Rouge area. GFS model paints a similar story in terms of big-time rainfall, keeps it a little farther to the east in terms of the biggest rainfall. But at this point, really, the important thing is that the hints are there, that we could be looking at some big-time rainfall out of this system. Mark, not necessarily the where that's important, but right now, the potential, and we're going to work out the where in the coming days.
Yeah, and let's face it, those white colors on there, that's 24 to 30 inches or more of rain. You don't see those numbers all that often, and they are damaging, if not deadly, when they verify. So to nail down that forecast, we're getting all the data. Hurricane hunters have been out in the storm. They'll continue to fly patterns through the storm over the next couple of days, and these planes are highly specialized aircraft. Jim Cantori shows us the fleet.
I want to introduce you to the Hurricane Hunters, a fleet of 13 planes that provides us with crucial information about what a tropical system, whether it be a depression, a storm, or hurricane, is doing and where it may go as we go on in time. First aircraft, the NOAA Orion P-3. Great names for this, too. How about Miss Piggy and Kermit the Frog? Believe me, that's what they call these names. Those are their nicknames. These planes fly anywhere from 1,500 feet to 10,000 feet. They can do missions like the Hurricane Hunter aircraft I'm going to show you, but most importantly, they contain some really cool instruments for research. On the front, the Gus probe. Looks kind of like a little barber pole. Remember the old barber poles the barber shops used to go to? On the bottom side, we have a horizontal radar. What does that storm look like? Is it symmetric? Is it round? Is it oblong? All right, that gives us a good idea of the structure of the storm. And on the tail, when the plane moves through the storm, It can actually look at the towers of precipitation. How high are these towers? Are they growing? Are they weakening in time? So some great information about what's going on with the physics of that storm that can be thrown into some of the intensity models that we have. All right, these guys are the heavy lifters. We have 10 of these planes. These are the WC-130J hurricane hunters. They're going in and out of the eye of the storm. They're going right through the eye wall of the storm. Imagine a 150-mile-per-hour hurricane. They're flying in and out of that thing several times during their 12-hour mission. All right, and they use a radar on the nose to actually look at where they're going into this thing. But believe me, it is a wild ride, to say the least. Once inside the plane, the men and women meteorologists there doing these 12-hour missions provide an important role of what's happening with the storm. So imagine a big cube. They're trying to get a volume of information from the outer sides of the storm right into the eye, and it's real time. So they throw out these instruments called the dropson, and those dropsons get that information for us. They also have an SFMR instrument, which is a microwave instrument that looks at the turbidity of the ocean and also estimates the intensity of the storm. Just an awesome, awesome plane. All right, last but never least, I want to introduce you to Gonzo. This is the G4 aircraft. This is mainly for high-altitude missions. What is the atmosphere like that storm is moving into? Is it dry? Does it contain a lot of wind shear? That data is gathered by this plane, put into computer models to spit out a better forecast for us down the road as a threatening storm makes its way toward the United States of America. The fleet of 13 Hurricane Hunter aircraft, essential arsenal for us in the United States.
And a couple of those planes have been in the air already today. Dr. Knabb, there are scheduled flights now for the foreseeable future until this thing comes all the way on shore.
Yeah, we almost always have the benefit of Hurricane Hunter flights into and around the storm when it's threatening land in the U.S. and in other countries in the Atlantic Basin. But when it's trying to form and strengthen and affect us in the northern Gulf, all right on our doorstep, all right near where these planes are based, you can guarantee we're going to get continuous coverage from Air Force and NOAA planes. That's one of the NOAA P3s that's in the air right now. They are doing a lawnmower pattern over the developing depression to get data into the model. So that's one of the NOAA P3s. The Air Force C-130 that Jim was just showing you, they did a low-level investigative flight earlier today, and here's the path they took, and they were zipping around looking for a well-defined center. They never did find that during their mission this afternoon, and that's why they didn't, at the Hurricane Center, upgrade this to a depression yet. But the Lakeland base of the NOAA planes, that's where the P3 took off from. You can see this lawnmower pattern that they're doing. They're flying over what is the developing center of this depression, and they're dropping a lot of dropsons, and all this data will get into the computer forecast models to help us get a better forecast of the intensity and size of the system tomorrow in the models. Now, this Hurricane Watch is one of the things that is placed based on the Hurricane Hunter data because they give us size information as well. We're going to update you on the complete forecast for this depression when we come back.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow, live in New Orleans on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. And while the sun is setting on this day, it started a whole different way. Massive flooding this morning from massive rainfall. And this is all ahead of what this system in the Gulf of Mexico could bring as we head through the rest of this weekend into the weekend as well. We have video of cars being flooded, people being helped through knee to waist deep water from time to time. When we got in town this morning, we were delayed because of that heavy rain. We still saw cars kind of stranded in intersections and the water was gone. It came up that fast and eventually also came down pretty quickly as well, but the damage was done. That's a big concern. I even had video of funnel clouds, even a tornado here in New Orleans from that same kind of disturbance coming on through here this morning. But we still have a lot more to come, all because of our potential tropical cyclone. Doesn't have a name yet, but the forecast too within the next 48 hours to become potentially a name system, at the very least a tropical depression. And I want to bring in Dr. Rick Knabb, our hurricane expert. And Dr. Knabb, looking at some of the forecasts for rainfall, and some of them are a little alarming, talking maybe 15, 20 inches. And I think back to almost 2 years ago with some of the forecasts for rainfall with Hurricane Harvey, and they were calling for a similar type of rainfall forecast ahead of time, 15, 20 inches. And we thought that's kind of a lot, but it turns out in reality, that was like maybe 3 to 4 times that amount. Is that a concern for this situation? I know everyone is different. Every tropical entity is unique, but are the models giving you some concern about what could happen here in Louisiana?
Yes, absolutely. Very, very concerned about a life-threatening inland flood event and river flood event, and events like Harvey, events like Florence, all where we were sounding the alarm ahead of time that it was going to be a life-threatening flood situation, and there was going to be so much rain that it wasn't just going to cover roads, but it could get water into homes and cover entire communities. That's the kind of situation we're facing again now. But I feel like, Paul, that sometimes people get hung up on what the status and the intensity of the system is and dismiss it because it's only an invest. It's not even a depression yet. How could this possibly be that big of a problem? But we've just got to be more afraid of the water. And hopefully this morning's events in New Orleans get people thinking, oh, okay, maybe this thing is capable of being this big rainmaker we've been talking about.
As you mentioned, this city in particular is definitely vulnerable to not only to rain, but storm surge, to flooding. We have the lake, we got the river, we have canals. There's water basically everywhere you throw a stone, you're going to find some water here, especially being below sea level. And the pumps, which normally keep New Orleans dry, can be overwhelmed with that type of heavy rain. So definitely a big concern for those here in New Orleans, but much of Louisiana. And Mark and Alex, I know you two also have come across people who say, oh, I'm only concerned if it's a Cat 2. Don't get caught up in what it's called. Get caught up in what it can bring, and that's impacts well away from the coast.
And so recently with storms, we've seen the big rainfall being the calling card and unfortunately causing all the destruction too.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. We've heard only and everything, right? It can be only a non-named thing, or only a depression, or only a tropical storm. Only doesn't really count these slow-moving storm systems that have so many far-reaching impacts.
Yeah, like we've been talking about, if you're wondering what the category of this system is going to be, keep reminding yourself the category is going to be slow. That slow category of systems of any intensity that can bring devastating flooding due to heavy rainfall and river flooding, and storm surge is going to be part of the mix too. So water is what we've got to stay out of to stay alive during this system. It's not even a depression yet, probably will be later tonight or tomorrow, and we are then expecting it to strengthen. It's starting to get its act together over the Gulf of Mexico. Here's where the center is trying to form, and I think with the warm waters, these model depictions of what will become of what it is now is pretty realistic in terms of its ability to strengthen, and it's going to do it right on our doorstep, just offshore, moving slowly enough to not only dump tremendous amounts of rainfall, but slowly enough to spend enough time over water that it could be a very, very strong system. So what the Hurricane Center's forecasting, can't argue with it.
And we're going to continue to monitor updates. We will be here throughout the evening providing you updates on this system. And of course, we're on tomorrow throughout the day.
And the field coverage only ramps up from here. You'll see Alex tomorrow from Lafayette, Louisiana, and so many more of our crews out and about as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. Remember, together we know more.